Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a phrase I am almost certain you've heard 1,000 times, and maybe even had directed at you. We're diving into the survival logic of the people pleaser label. Because let's be real, when someone calls you a people pleaser, it doesn't just feel like a casual observation about your personality, right? It kind of feels like a profound, deeply personal betrayal. Maybe a friend dropped it casually when you couldn't pick a restaurant, or a partner threw it out mid-argument. If you've ever felt totally misunderstood by this label, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get right into it. So why does it feel like a literal punch to the gut? We really need to start by just validating that visceral sting. When someone tosses out, "Oh, you're just a people pleaser," they usually mean it as a gentle critique, or just off the cuff. But on the receiving end, it rarely feels gentle. Just imagine, you sacrifice your whole weekend helping a friend move. You're orchestrating all the logistics so nobody argues playing peacekeeper, and then later you get called a pushover for not demanding where to go for lunch. No way! It feels like a massive insult to your integrity, not some harmless little quirk. It feels like all the exhausting behind-the-scenes work you do is just completely dismissed.
Which brings us to the unspoken weight of a label. And this really comes down to the perceived insult versus your actual integrity. Let's look at that immediate, entirely natural defensive reaction you get when your genuine efforts to be kind are just reduced to a psychological flaw. See, there's this huge disconnect. Externally, society looks at this behavior and they see weakness. They see someone who supposedly lacks boundaries, who just literally can't say no. But your internal reality? Oh, it is vastly different. You are working absolute overtime. You're doing all this complex emotional labor, constantly managing everyone else's feelings in the room. You aren't being weak. Actually, scratch that. You are actively carrying the emotional weight of the entire group. It's like you're an emotional air traffic controller, constantly calculating so nobody's feelings crash into each other.
And that leads right into the survival logic of being nice. It's actually a highly sophisticated strategy. To really get this dynamic, we need a complete paradigm shift here. We have got to stop viewing people-pleasing as a weakness and start seeing it for what it is, an incredibly sophisticated survival strategy. You are not a doormat. You are operating a highly calibrated social radar. Because this behavior, it doesn't just come out of thin air. It almost always originates as a highly necessary adaptation in an unpredictable, maybe volatile or high-pressure environment. Maybe growing up anticipating a parent's bad mood was literally the only way to keep the evening peaceful. You learned this to survive. You learned it to keep the peace, and you've spent a lifetime perfecting it to ensure collective social security.
Just think about how this radar operates in the wild. You walk into a room, let's say it's a tense meeting at work, and instantly, boom, you are monitoring social cues. You catch a tiny shift in tone, a micro-expression from your boss, a coworker crossing their arms. You're detecting and diffusing conflict long before anyone else even realizes there's a problem. And to pull that off, you have to deliberately prioritize the collective harmony over your own needs. Honestly, it takes an insane amount of intelligence, empathy, and raw processing power to constantly run this background program. It is an active, deeply demanding skill.
But relying on this creates what we can call your social safety net, which inevitably turns into a really high-stakes ecosystem. Because you rely so heavily on this radar, you kind of inadvertently build this incredibly fragile ecosystem for yourself. It starts when you tie your self-worth entirely to how useful you are to others, your utility in keeping everybody happy. And because of that, maintaining this flawless reputation as the easygoing one or the helper, well, it isn't just nice to have. It becomes your literal insurance policy against rejection. You start believing that as long as you are endlessly accommodating, you'll never face social isolation. But here is the tragic flaw in that ecosystem. Since your insurance policy demands total perfection, just one tiny mistake, like saying no just once or accidentally letting someone down, feels like it could collapse the entire foundation of your identity. The sheer exhaustion of keeping up this safety net means you are living on a knife's edge every single day. A single misstep doesn't just feel like, a bad Tuesday. It feels utterly catastrophic to your very sense of self.
So that brings us to the unrecognized sacrifice, and why the sting of the label hurts quite so much.
This fragile foundation completely explains the deep resentment that brews right under the surface when you feel like you're the only one putting in the work to keep the group intact. Because what's your intention? It's to provide safety and collective harmony. You are hypervigilant because you care, but then the label throws that right back in your face. The implication of being called a people pleaser is that you're manipulative or inauthentic, or that you just completely lack self-respect. It's this massive, incredibly painful disconnect between your noble intent to protect people and their reductive perception of you as just being weak. And ultimately, this is why it hurts so incredibly bad. The label feels like a deep personal betrayal of the very sacrifices you make every single day. You are literally burning yourself out to ensure the collective social security of your friends, your family, your team. And instead of getting a thank you, you get slapped with a dismissive term. You're being criticized for the exact exhausting labor that is holding the whole shebang together in the first place.
Let's talk about reclaiming your self-worth. It's all about empathy without self-abandonment.
So, what do? How do we move forward without losing your beautiful natural gift of empathy? Well, we have to build a totally new mental model. We are absolutely not discarding your skills here. Instead, we're going to acknowledge your immense strengths of empathy, intelligence, and cooperation. The real game changer is shifting the motivation. We need to make supporting others a conscious, grounded choice, not a panic-driven survival requirement. Think of it like this. You help a coworker because you genuinely have the bandwidth and the desire to help, not because you're terrified they'll be mad if you say no. You have to integrate your love for harmony with internal validation. Your worth has to come from within, completely independent of how useful you are to the room.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, really powerful question to chew on. Take a second and really think about this. What happens when you choose to support others, not because you're terrified of being rejected, not for your survival, but from a place of grounded internal strength? When you make that shift, your generosity becomes a gift, rather than a tax you have to pay to exist in the group. You don't have to stop being kind, for sure, but you absolutely have to start being kind to yourself first. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this today. Keep learning, keep growing, and remember to validate yourself.